Hey there, Naota Hashimoto here, Dr. Hashimoto here with the very famous Kathy Weidner from KMC, and we're going to talk about a sexy, unsexy topic of compliance, a topic that you love talking about.
Mhm.
Thank you for coming on here today.
Happy to.
And then, yeah, obviously, like a lot of people, everyone wants to know about new gadgets, new widgets, ways to get new patients. However, keeping the money, keeping your license is also probably a really good thing. And yeah, can you just tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Compliance is one small part of what we do, but the thing about compliance is that it touches everything. So, there's a clinical and a business side of practice. So, compliance is really the DNA of what happens on the business side of the practice. And unfortunately, what a lot of people do is forget that side or hear what their buddies do and they think it's okay, or the joint does this, so it must be fine. Then the stories, right? 43 years in the profession now, I think I've heard every single story. But those simple little missteps lead to bigger problems and very often could actually be a huge challenge. I just was preparing for an on-site visit that I'm going to be doing where the doctor's been audited by their Blue Cross in their state, and it's to the tune of $178,000 because they weren't coding right. Their documentation was not complete when they asked for it. And these are all preparatory things that doctors can and should do to make sure they feel protected and they feel bulletproof. So, documentation, coding, Medicare, compliance, it all blends together. It's all one thing.
So obviously there's going to be more of a cost to that. What's it typically cost someone if they do the wrong thing? Obviously it
It
costs a lot
depends.
more, but
Could. I mean, I've had experience in both ends of that, right? So we had a client one time that had, it was a patient complaint that prompted the challenge, and they were audited. And we assisted them through the audit process and helped them to prepare everything for it and immediately start fixing what was broken. And it was 365 or $85,000 was the amount of that refund request. And because of the work that we did, and they showed they were fixing, they didn't know it was an error, it wasn't a fraudulent attempt. They turned it into a what they call an educational audit and allowed the doctor to forego that recoupment and then be audited again in 6 months to make sure they were staying on track. So those are the great ones. I've also seen doctors, very rarely, but I've seen doctors go all the way to jail because what they're showing is intent and they knew better and they did it anyway. And those are not easy to defend.
and then what are kind of like the top two things that people usually get popped for or noticed for?
Billing beyond what is medically necessary so that the documentation doesn't necessarily show that there is still function to be improved or there is still a concern. Not moving the patient from active into maintenance care, which would be self-pay at that point, is easily number one. That is the number one problem. And from that respect, of course, they only know when the triggers happen or they ask for the records. And I would say the biggest thing we try to help doctors know is if you get a records request, that is the end of a sweater thread. So please talk to a professional before you just send in those records because there are things you can do to buoy it up, make sure it's at least close to what it should be. And then I would say the second thing really is just not understanding the coding, full spine adjusting, especially. So, I lay down on the table at my chiropractor, I get a full spine and my knees and my ankles and the whole 9 yards. But what's medically necessary is probably not all of those areas. And we have to know the difference between what's actually medically necessary and active and what would be more compensatory or an ancillary area that stabilizes the primary area. So that is once that gets fixed, those two things are the biggest things that are hard for us to watch doctors doing because they're problematic.
Yeah, so you're saying that when I was an associate my first year in practice and the biller told me to change the injury date every month for Medicare, which I later
Hey,
found out was not right, but I didn't know. I was naive. I was
we
fresh
all
out of
did it.
school.
I
So,
started in 1983, and everyone who had a spine and a pulse got full spine x-rays. I mean, literally it was, different day, different time, and you build until you didn't, and times have definitely changed.
yeah, and then earlier we were talking about like some recent changes with HIPAA and their
Hmm.
documentation. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that?
So interestingly enough, there was a big change to, the biggest change that's happened in HIPAA privacy really since, I don't know, 15 years ago, has to do with this substance use disorder. And it's essentially that substance uh, centers, rehab centers, things of that nature, they never had to follow all the rules of HIPAA before. So this was just right setting it so everyone did. So they sent out this whole thing. You've got to change your notice of privacy practice, got to make sure that you have this certain language in it now that has to do with this substance use disorder. And chiropractors particularly kind of panicked and were like, what do we do? What do we do with our new NPP? And it's important to know that they're not considered providers because we're not really doing that service, but are what are called lawful holders. So, holders of the information. So, you may have to have a substance use disorder clinic ask for the patient's records. At that point, that puts you into the mix. You could receive documentation where you request information from another doctor that includes those things. So, we have probably the top HIPAA person easily in all of healthcare, certainly all of chiropractic. And she did a beautiful help desk video and explanation. We'll include the link here so that you can go and just watch it, see it directly from her information. But you will need to make a small change to your notice of privacy practices. At, I think it was 5 o'clock on a Friday, they put out the information of what needed to change. So nobody needs to panic. We'll get it done. It's not going to be the end of the world, but it is, again, one of those necessary things that has to get done.
Yeah, so it's like, and that just kind of brings me to another point, like having someone like you guys in their pocket, like keeping up, because, we're busy trying to like
That's
serve
right.
patients, hire
Yeah.
staff, train staff, and
Yeah.
keeping up on all these little nuance rules is kind of a pain. And you also talked about like having a place to review your records. Like if you get a chart request and then you have to
Yeah.
go set up an appointment with you guys, that's going to be a pain in the butt, right?
No,
Versus if
not
you're
in the least.
well, not a, it's easier. It'd be easier if you're an existing client to go get a
It could
call.
be. It certainly could be. We have all HIPAA secure folders. Somebody can just purchase time with us and they don't have to be a member, and we can supply the same result. If someone is working with us already and they're in the family, so to speak, and we're working with them on something, it is of course seamless because we're already looking at their documentation. We might have already known this was coming in some cases as well. But it is, it's one of the things we pride ourselves on. Now, this is our 19th year in business. And I love that, you can be a member and be in the family and have access to everything, or you can use us on demand, which a lot of people do. We're grateful for those that just keep coming back when they need us.
Yeah, so they could just be a la carte, have an account,
Hmm.
and then obviously when
Yeah.
something happens, or maybe just have an annual meeting and say, "Hey, what's new? What do I have to change?"
That's right. And, we are all certified. There are not a lot of people in our profession doing what we do that actually are certified specialists. So, for me personally, I have to get 24 hours of continuing education every year in all of this. So, we have to keep up. And then, of course, we just make it our business to make sure our clients know what's going on. And in these circumstances, we will always pass the information on. I feel came out of the ACA early in my career, worked there as the director for insurance, and whether you're a member or not of the ACA, you're still entitled to certain basic information. And we sort of feel the same way between our Facebook group, those that just kind of follow us in general terms, get our emails or come to our free webinars. We always want to make sure that we're exchanging an abundance with the profession. So if something's going on, we want to make sure you know. For example, everyone's freaking out because the ABN form is expiring or expired in February earlier. But as usual, 5 years ago, same thing happened. CMS did not put out the new one. And so no one knows what to do. Well, you keep using the old one. And then there's certain things you do when the new one comes out that you get updated and then you move on. But we know this, we know it, we own it. And, we've been putting this information out through our Facebook group and obviously our emails and other things that we do with the profession for a while, just so people can be informed. Because to your point, you're busy, you know, we are a profession that loves to run from free group to get their questions answered, and they're not always right. That's for sure. That is for sure.
Yeah, no, like sometimes free advice isn't always the best stuff. I've always like paying for my advice. Um,
Absolutely.
Another thing we talked about earlier is, like so we have a number of clients that have moved to like we'll call it 100% cash, but they still have
Hmm.
Medicare, right?
Sure, they're
And
supposed to.
yeah, it's like, do they need to do compliance?
It's true, because Medicare is the central hub of the wheel for compliance, because that's where the rules come from. And as a chiropractor, you cannot opt out of Medicare. So essentially, it means you can't touch a Medicare patient without being enrolled properly. And that's in Part B. Whole other can of worms in Part C, or the Advantage plans. But even if you decided to turn all the Medicare patients away, which would be silly, 10,000 people a day age into Medicare, your patient population will age in. I think it's the worst idea ever. And Medicare is certainly not that hard to deal with. But the doctors have to understand that there are other things that touch compliance, such as all the HIPAA stuff, all of the No Surprises Act stuff. All of these things apply to every single practice. But even your state board requires that some of this type of thing is done. A little bit of self auditing, all the things that go along with what compliance really is. So having some compliance framework within the practice is going to scale depending on it's you and your spouse, and you're running the practice and you see 30 people a week versus, 10 doctors and all the different things. It will scale according to your needs. So we just think that having something shows a little bit that you're not the droid they're looking for if they come along, because you're trying, you're doing something. You're not essentially ignoring the rules and saying this doesn't apply to me. Because I love a cash-based practice. I love a hybrid practice, leveraging insurance when you can, and then being able to have the majority of your money come across the front counter. Who doesn't love that? And leverage insurance when you can. That's totally fine to do. But the moment you do one thing, out of network insurance or Medicare, whatever, all the rules come on, and then we have to deal with that. And I promise you, it's not that hard. It really isn't that much when you look at it from 15,000 feet.
So it just brings me to another question. I see people commenting on this a bit is like they're running these, I don't know, 47, 49, $99 specials or whatever. They
Yeah.
take insurance. Like, do you need like a certain like disclaimer, like insurance or federal rules apply? And then what do you do on that first visit? And like,
Yeah.
because I see a number of people, what they do is they just bill them the cash price and don't bill their insurance. Is there obviously a better
Or
way of doing that?
or they charge 49 and then to the patient, and then they bill the full amount to the insurance, which is even worse. But the right answer to this is that it depends, because it will depend on the payer, it will depend on the state, it will depend on whether they're federally insured. It could be mail handlers insurance, it could be federal Blue Cross, Medicare. There's all of these different rules, and that's the stuff that we have to keep up on, which is why spending a little bit of money, under $100, to sit down with a specialist and talk through a situation, we can help you make sure you're doing it exactly right. But the safest thing in most cases, let's forget Medicare for an example, because if you're charging everybody else $150 for an E&M initial visit code, because you can get paid that by a payer or a PI, whatever it is, and then that Medicare patient pays 39 for the same thing, that is now an inducement, which is a federal law that got broken. So we don't want to do that. But for example, if let's say that you've got the $49 fee and it's normally 150, and the patient came in on whatever the special deal was and it was 49 for this E&M service, but they have insurance. The right thing to do is let them pay 49 and do not bill for that code to the payer, because you've already been paid for that. It's something outside the realm. You could bill
And sometimes
49
they didn't
for
even
that.
know they had insurance, right? They just call on the
That's right.
phone, scheduled online, they come in and you find out they have insurance, right? So
Well, you
as
got to
long as
know
they're
all
not
that stuff.
as
You
long
do
as they're
need to
not
know that.
double billing it.
Right. We're not going to double bill, but we are not doing our job if that patient's eyeballs are in front of me and I don't know if they have insurance. That's a CA that's not doing their job. And in those cases, this is where we have real problems because we should have already taken information. Like scheduling a new patient appointment online is ridiculous to me because unless you're asking them 50 questions about all of those things, and then you're taking that information and you're not only checking eligibility, but you're properly verifying it and you're pulling up the medical review policy for their payer, you're going to be flying blind when they get there. So there's certain things that have to happen. And, if you're doing an online thing, great, make it work properly. Or if you're doing, a phone call, you're asking the right questions and you're prepared when they walk in, then they have a choice. They do have a choice at that point. We love Chiro Health USA, for example. And sometimes if my full initial visit fee is $350, and I know that whole thing's going to go to someone's deductible, and I can do a 125 capped fee for an initial visit, maybe that patient wants to opt out of their insurance and do that. I need to have all that information prepared to be able to explain it to the patient on that first visit. This is why your CAs are so incredibly important. And gosh, docs, when you're throwing your CA there and going, okay, you'll figure it out, boy, you're doing yourself such a huge disservice because they can make or break it for you with compliance with everything.
And you guys have all kinds of training for EAs and
Yeah.
stuff like that too, right?
Yeah, and doctors. We have the
Yeah.
largest compendium of online training anywhere in the profession in the KMC University Library. We have, do it yourself kind of training through courses and quick answers and all of that. And then we also pair that when someone needs a little one-on-one help with a specialist. We work as doctors do with protocols. We do our analysis just like you do an initial visit. We know what's going on. We can figure that out. And then we can make a recommendation. That's your treatment plan, and then we're going to treat, or we're going to help you implement and train and do the things you need to do. But we keep that up to date and up to speed so that all that information is there. We've got some of the best initial like basic CA training anywhere. We have the triple coursework for a back office clinical CA that is second to none. And then we have just all the insurance and documentation and Medicare coding. We have all of it there. It's quite a lot.
So for like everyone's heard of you unless they've been under a rock, right? But like where do they start? Like that there's so many places to start with you guys, but
Yeah.
where should they start?
I think if someone isn't quite sure, like, I don't know what I need, here's what's going on, help me understand what I need. We offer discovery assessments at no cost. Very simple to do that right on our homepage at kmcuniversity.com. There's a button you can go right in and schedule it, and you'll speak to someone who can help you kind of regurgitate what you think is going on, and we can help maybe point you from there. Maybe you need some analysis. Imagine in a doctor's office, the free consultation, right? Somebody comes in, they tell you what's going on. You don't know yet if they're a great candidate for care. You feel like they probably are, but you might need to do an exam, and you might need to take an x-ray to give you more data to then be able to make the right plan. That discovery consultation is always at no cost. Sometimes people just need some answers. Like, I've got these 3 questions, that's all I need. We offer our solution consultations. That's that a la carte, kind of up to 30 minutes, sit down with a specialist, send in if you want us to look at something, in, out, and done, and you're good to go, all the way up to memberships. So I always say start there. Let's find out what you need. Well, I'm not going to slam you down on the table and adjust you. I promise that we'll find out what you need, and then we'll point you in the right direction.
Well, perfect. Well, thanks for coming on here. You shared a lot of information. I'm going to put all the links below. And, thank you for serving the profession.
Thank you for asking. And it's my pleasure. It's been not only a great opportunity for me in my business world, but chiropractic has made my life better. I've been a patient now for 43 years, and I don't know what I'd do without it.
Well, thank you very much. You have a good
Mm.
day.